Daniel Carter had always been someone who liked to get his hands dirty. He didn't believe in making decisions from behind a desk without understanding the reality of what happened on the ground. That's why, when complaints about mishandled luggage started flooding into Skyline Airlines' customer service department, Daniel decided it was time to take matters into his own hands. But instead of sending out memos or hiring consultants, he chose a more unconventional approach. He went undercover. It wasn't easy convincing himself to do it. After all, Daniel was the CEO of one of the largest airlines in the country. His days were usually filled with board meetings, strategy sessions, and press conferences. Yet here he was, standing in front of a mirror, adjusting a baseball cap that covered his neatly styled hair. He had traded his tailored suits for a pair of worn jeans and a faded Skyline Airlines staff shirt. For the next week, he would be Danny, just another nameless face in the crowd of airport employees. The idea had come to him late one evening, while reviewing passenger feedback reports. There were too many stories about broken electronics, missing items, and damaged bags. At first, Daniel thought it might be an isolated issue, perhaps a few careless handlers, but the sheer volume of complaints made him uneasy. Something wasn't right, and if he wanted to find out what was really going on, he needed to see it for himself. So, early Monday morning, Daniel arrived at JFK International Airport, where Skyline operated one of its busiest terminals. He checked in with human resources under the guise of a temporary worker, filling in for someone on leave. No one questioned him. After all, airports were constantly understaffed, and new faces blended in easily among the chaos. Within minutes, he was handed a pair of gloves and directed toward the baggage handling area. The moment Daniel stepped into the warehouse, he felt overwhelmed. It was loud, chaotic, and smelled faintly of rubber and fuel. Conveyor belts snaked through the space like mechanical rivers, carrying endless streams of luggage. Workers moved quickly, shouting over the din of machinery as they loaded and unloaded carts. It was nothing like the polished image Skyline projected in its advertisements. Daniel's supervisor for the day turned out to be Emily Lewis, a petite woman with sharp features and an even sharper tone. She introduced herself briefly before assigning him to work alongside Jake Miller, a lanky guy in his mid-20s who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "All right, listen up," Emily barked, her voice cutting through the noise. "We've got 3 flights unloading within the next hour. Move fast, don't drop anything fragile, and stay out of my way unless you need something." With that, she turned on her heel and disappeared into the maze of conveyor belts. Jake gave Daniel a sympathetic smile. "Don't worry, man. Just keep your head down and do what she says. You'll survive." For the first hour, Daniel struggled to keep up. Handling luggage wasn't as simple as it seemed. Some bags were light, others heavy enough to strain his arms. Occasionally, he'd catch glimpses of tags marked fragile or handle with care, but nobody paid them much attention. Bags were tossed onto carts with little regard for their contents. Daniel winced every time he heard the thud of something hitting the metal floor. As the morning wore on, he began to notice patterns. Most of the workers followed the same routine: grab a bag, check the tag, throw it onto the appropriate cart. But there were exceptions. Every so often, Emily, or another senior handler named Ryan Scott, would pull a suitcase aside. These weren't random selections. They targeted specific bags, usually expensive-looking ones or those labeled as priority shipments. Once separated, the bags were scanned using handheld devices before being placed in a separate pile. "What's going on with those bags?" Daniel asked Jake during a brief lull. Jake hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I wouldn't ask too many questions if I were you," he muttered. "Just focus on your job." But Daniel couldn't let it go. Something about the whole situation felt off. Why were certain bags being treated differently? What were they scanning them for? And why did Emily and Ryan seem so intent on keeping whatever they were doing hidden? By lunchtime, Daniel's curiosity had reached a fever pitch. He grabbed a sandwich from the vending machine and sat down next to Jake, hoping to pry more information out of him. "So, how long have you worked here?" Daniel asked casually. "About 6 months," Jake replied. "It's not exactly my Dream job, but it pays the bills. Daniel nodded, then leaned in slightly. You ever notice anything unusual about how things are run around here? Jake froze, his sandwich halfway to his mouth. For a moment, Daniel thought he might clam up completely. But then Jake sighed and shook his head. Look, I don't know what you're getting at, okay? All I'm saying is some people have been here a lot longer than us. They've got their ways of doing things, and it's better not to stick your nose where it doesn't belong. The warning was clear, but it only fueled Daniel's determination. Whatever was happening behind the scenes, he was determined to uncover it. Little did he know his investigation was about to lead him down a far darker path than he could have imagined. As the days passed, Daniel became more entrenched in the rhythm of the baggage handling crew. Each shift brought new challenges: long hours, heavy lifting, and the constant pressure to move faster. But despite the physical demands, his mind remained focused on uncovering the truth. He couldn't shake the feeling that Emily and Ryan were hiding something significant, and every odd behavior he observed only deepened his suspicions. It started with small things. For instance, whenever a flight arrived from certain destinations, luxury vacation spots or major business hubs, Emily and Ryan seemed especially alert. They would hover near the conveyor belts, scanning tags with practiced precision before pulling specific bags aside. These weren't random selections. They targeted high-end luggage, often designer brands, or those marked as priority shipments. Once separated, the bags disappeared into a secluded corner of the warehouse where Daniel wasn't allowed to go. One evening, after a particularly busy shift, Daniel decided to take matters into his own hands. While everyone else was distracted unloading a late-night flight, he lingered near the pile of set-aside bags. Pretending to adjust his gloves, he leaned closer to examine one of them, a sleek black suitcase with gold trim. It looked expensive, the kind of bag someone wealthy might use for international travel. What could possibly be inside that warranted such special treatment? Before he could think twice, Ryan appeared beside him. "What are you doing here?" he snapped, his tone sharp enough to make Daniel jump. "Nothing," Daniel stammered, stepping back quickly. "Just, making sure everything's stacked properly." Ryan narrowed his eyes but didn't press further. Instead, he grabbed the suitcase and carried it toward the restricted area. Daniel watched him go, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. Whatever was happening, it was clear that these two senior handlers didn't want anyone else getting involved. The next day, Daniel tried again, this time taking a different approach. During a quick break, he struck up a conversation with Jake, hoping to glean some insight without raising suspicion. "So, what do you think happens to those special bags?" Daniel asked casually, nodding toward the corner where Emily and Ryan usually worked. Jake hesitated, glancing around nervously. "I told you before, man, it's better not to ask questions." "But come on," Daniel persisted. "You must have noticed something, like, why do they scan them? What's so important about those bags?" Jake sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. "Look, I don't know all the details, okay? All I know is that sometimes stuff goes missing. Expensive stuff, electronics, jewelry, even cash. People file claims and we get blamed for it. But honestly, I think it's bigger than us." Daniel's heart raced. So Jake suspected foul play too. But how far did it go? Was this just a couple of rogue employees skimming off the top? Or was there something more sinister at work? Determined to find answers, Daniel decided to take a risk. Late one night, after most of the crew had clocked out, he snuck back into the warehouse. The place was eerily quiet, the hum of machinery replaced by an almost oppressive silence. Using a flashlight app on his phone, he made his way to the restricted area where Emily and Ryan conducted their secret operations. To his surprise, it wasn't locked. Pushing the door open cautiously, Daniel stepped inside. The room was cluttered, with tools, scanners, and several unmarked boxes stacked against the wall. On a nearby table lay a battered logbook, its pages filled with handwritten notes. Heart pounding, Daniel flipped it open. The entries confirmed his worst fears. Listed in meticulous detail were descriptions of intercepted items, luxury watches, laptops, stacks of cash, all taken from passenger luggage. Beside each entry was a code, likely corresponding to the handler responsible for the theft. Some names appeared repeatedly, including Emily's and Ryan's. Worse still, there were references to other airports, suggesting that this wasn't an isolated incident but part of a larger network spanning multiple locations. Daniel's hands trembled as he scrolled through the pages. This wasn't just petty theft, it was organized crime. And if he didn't act fast, the perpetrators would continue exploiting Skyline Airlines' system unchecked. Suddenly, a noise outside startled him. Panicking, Daniel shoved the logbook back onto the table and turned off his flashlight. Peering through the crack in the door, he saw Emily approaching, her footsteps echoing softly against the concrete floor. She paused briefly, glanced around, then entered the room. For a moment, Daniel thought she'd spotted him, but instead she walked straight to the logbook, flipping through its pages with practiced ease. From his hiding spot, Daniel watched as she added a new entry, jotting down details about a recent haul. When she finished, she slipped the book into a drawer and locked it securely. Once she left, Daniel exhaled a shaky breath. He knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. Gathering his courage, he reached for his phone and began snapping photos of the logbook, careful not to disturb anything. Every second felt like an eternity, but he managed to capture enough evidence to expose the operation. As he slipped out of the room and headed back toward the main warehouse, Daniel's mind raced. He had proof now, but what should he do with it? Going directly to law enforcement might put him in danger, especially if Emily and Ryan caught wind of his discovery. On the other hand, keeping quiet wasn't an option either, not when innocent. Passengers were being robbed blind. By the time he returned home that night, Daniel had formulated a plan. First thing in the morning, he would reach out to Sarah Bennett, a trusted executive assistant at Skyline Airlines headquarters. She was discreet and loyal, exactly the kind of person who could help him navigate this mess without tipping off the wrong people. But even as he sent her a brief, cryptic message requesting an urgent meeting, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he was playing with fire. Emily and Ryan weren't amateurs. They'd been running this scheme for who knows how long. If they discovered what he was up to, there was no telling how far they'd go to protect themselves. Still, Daniel refused to back down. For years, he'd prided himself on building Skyline Airlines into a reputable company. He wouldn't let a few corrupt individuals tarnish its name, or worse, destroy everything he'd worked so hard to achieve. Whatever happened next, he vowed to see this through to the end. The next morning, Daniel woke up feeling like he was walking a tightrope. He had spent the night replaying every detail of what he'd uncovered, trying to decide how far he could push his investigation without putting himself and others at risk. His meeting with Sarah Bennett loomed ahead, but until then he had to keep acting normal. That meant going back to work, pretending nothing was wrong, even though his mind was racing with questions and fears. When he arrived at the airport, Emily greeted him with her usual brusque demeanor. "Late again?" she said, raising an eyebrow. "You better pick up the pace if you want to stick around here." Daniel forced a smile. "Yeah, sorry about that. Traffic was bad." Emily didn't look convinced, but she didn't press further. Instead, she handed him a pair of gloves and pointed toward the conveyor belt. "Get to it. We've got a full schedule today." As the hours dragged on, Daniel found it harder than ever to focus. Every time Emily or Ryan glanced in his direction, his stomach churned. Had they noticed something? Was he being too obvious? Jake seemed to sense his unease because during a quick break, he pulled Daniel aside. "You okay, man?" Jake asked quietly. "You seem, I don't know, distracted." "I'm fine," Daniel replied, though his voice betrayed him. "Just tired, that's all." Jake frowned but didn't argue. Instead, he leaned in closer. "Listen, whatever's going on, be careful. Those two," he nodded subtly toward Emily and Ryan, "they're not people you want to mess with." Daniel nodded, grateful for the warning, but unable to share what he knew. For now, he had to play along, biding his time until he could speak with Sarah. Later that afternoon, Daniel finally managed to slip away for his meeting with Sarah. They met in a quiet cafe near the airport, far enough to avoid suspicion, but close enough for Daniel to return quickly if needed. As soon as they sat down, Sarah could tell something was wrong. "What's going on, Daniel?" she asked, her tone serious. "Your message sounded urgent." Taking a deep breath, Daniel explained everything: the strange behavior of Emily and Ryan, the hidden logbook and the evidence he'd gathered. He showed her the photos on his phone, pointing out key details that proved the smuggling operation was real. Sarah listened intently, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When Daniel finished, she shook her head in disbelief. "This is huge. If this gets out, it could destroy the company's reputation." "I know," Daniel said grimly. "But we can't ignore it. Innocent passengers are losing their belongings, and these people are profiting off it. We have to stop them." Sarah agreed, but she also warned him about the risks. "If Emily and Ryan find out you're onto them, they won't hesitate to retaliate. You need to be smart about this." Together, they devised a plan. Sarah would discreetly contact law enforcement and arrange for a sting operation to catch the smugglers in the act. In the meantime, Daniel would continue gathering evidence while staying under the radar. It was dangerous, but it was the only way to ensure justice was served. Back at the airport, tensions began to rise. Jake accidentally stumbled upon part of the scheme when he overheard Emily and Ryan discussing a recent shipment. Panicked, he confronted Daniel during their lunch break. "I heard them talking," Jake whispered urgently. "They mentioned some kind of drop-off tonight. What's going on, Danny? Are you involved in this?" Daniel hesitated. He hadn't planned on bringing Jake into the fold, but the kid clearly knew more than he should. Deciding honesty was the best policy, Daniel told him the truth, or at least a simplified version of it. "Look, Jake," he said, lowering his voice. "There's something bigger happening here, and I'm trying to figure it out. But you need to trust me and stay quiet, okay? This isn't just about missing luggage, it's about keeping everyone safe." To his relief, Jake nodded. "All right, I'll keep my mouth shut, but promise me one thing. You'll be careful." "I will," Daniel assured him. "I promise." That evening, the stakes grew even higher. As Daniel worked his shift, he couldn't shake the feeling that Emily and Ryan were watching him more closely than usual. At one point, Ryan cornered him, near the conveyor belt. "You've been asking a lot of questions lately," Ryan said, his tone icy. "What's your deal, huh? You trying to cause trouble?" Daniel swallowed hard but kept his composure. "No trouble. Just curious, that's all. I'm new here, remember?" Ryan studied him for a moment, then smirked. "Well, curiosity killed the cat, kid. Keep that in mind." Despite the threat, Daniel refused to back down. He knew he was running out of time. Law enforcement was preparing to move in, but until then, he had to stay vigilant. Late that night, after most of the crew had left, Daniel decided to take another risk. He snuck into the restricted area once more, hoping to plant a tracker on one of the smugglers' vehicles. If he could track their movements, it would give law enforcement a crucial advantage. Moving quickly, he attached the small device to the underside of a delivery van parked nearby. Just as he finished, however, he heard footsteps approaching. Ducking behind a stack of crates, he watched as Emily and Ryan emerged from the warehouse, carrying a large duffel bag between them. Their conversation was muffled, but Daniel caught snippets about a big score and a safe house. His heart raced. They were planning something big, and he had no idea when, or if, it would be stopped in time. As they drove off, Daniel slipped out of hiding and returned to the main terminal. Exhausted but determined, he sent a final update to Sarah, detailing everything he'd seen. By now, there was no turning back. Whatever happened next, he was ready to face it head on. The next few days felt like walking through a minefield for Daniel. Every move he made was calculated, every word he spoke carefully chosen. Emily and Ryan's suspicion had grown palpable, and they weren't hiding it anymore. They watched him, closely, exchanging sharp glances whenever he lingered too long near the restricted area, or asked questions that seemed even remotely out of line. It was clear they were onto him. Daniel knew he couldn't afford any mistakes. Law enforcement was preparing to act, But until then, he had to keep playing his role as Danny, the clueless temp worker. Yet, the pressure was mounting. Each shift felt longer than the last, and the constant fear of being discovered weighed heavily on him. He tried to focus on the task at hand, but his mind kept drifting back to the tracker he'd planted on the delivery van. Where had Emily and Ryan gone? What were they planning? One evening, during a particularly chaotic shift, Jake pulled Daniel aside. His face was pale and his hands trembled slightly as he spoke. "They know something's up," he whispered urgently. "I overheard them talking about you." Daniel's stomach sank. "What did they say?" Jake hesitated, glancing around nervously. "Not much, just that you're asking too many questions, but Ryan, he said if you don't stop, there'll be consequences." Daniel forced a calm expression, though his heart was racing. "Thanks for telling me, Jake. I'll be careful." "You better," Jake muttered. "Because I don't think they're messing around." Later that night, as the crew worked to unload a late-night flight, Daniel noticed Emily and Ryan huddled together near the conveyor belt. Their voices were low, but their body language was tense. Whatever they were discussing, it wasn't good. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to act quickly. Desperate to buy himself some time, he decided to create a diversion. As the team took a brief break, he slipped away unnoticed and triggered the fire alarm in a secluded corner of the warehouse. The piercing sound echoed through the building, followed by flashing red lights and automated announcements instructing everyone to evacuate immediately. Chaos erupted almost instantly. Workers scrambled toward the exits, shouting over the noise as supervisors tried to restore order. Amid the confusion, Daniel spotted Emily and Ryan making a beeline for the restricted area. They were trying to grab something, probably evidence, of their operation, before anyone could stop them. Seizing the opportunity, Daniel followed them at a safe distance. When they reached the hidden room, he saw them frantically searching through drawers and cabinets. Ryan pulled out the logbook and shoved it into a duffel bag, while Emily grabbed a stack of documents and stuffed them inside as well. Daniel knew this was his chance. While they were distracted, he quietly snapped photos of everything: the open drawers, the scattered papers, and the panicked expressions on their faces. He even managed to capture a shot of the duffel bag, its contents spilling out slightly, to reveal bundles of cash and expensive jewelry. But just as he was about to slip away, Emily turned suddenly and caught sight of him. Her eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in anger. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the din of the alarm. Caught off guard, Daniel froze for a split second before blurting out the first thing that came to Tondor. "I heard the alarm and thought someone might need help." Ryan stepped forward, his fists clenched. "Don't play dumb with us, kid. We know you've been poking around where you shouldn't." Daniel's mind raced. He needed to defuse the situation before it escalated further. Summoning every ounce of courage, he admitted the truth, or at least part of it. "Fine. You got me. My name's not Danny. I'm Daniel Carter, CEO of Skyline Airlines. I came here undercover because I wanted to find out why so many passengers were complaining about lost or damaged luggage." For a moment, silence hung, heavy in the air. Then Emily laughed bitterly. "So you're the big boss, huh? Well, congratulations. You found your answer. But let me tell you something. If you try to expose us, you'll regret it. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Daniel held his ground, though his heart pounded wildly. "It's over, Emily. Law enforcement already knows what you've been doing. If I don't check in soon, they'll come straight here." Her expression darkened, and for a moment, Daniel thought she might lunge at him. But instead, she exchanged a quick glance with Ryan, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Without another word, they grabbed the duffel bag and bolted toward the exit. Daniel didn't chase after them. Instead, he called Sarah, updating her on the situation and urging her to alert law enforcement immediately. Within minutes, police cars and unmarked vehicles surrounded the airport, blocking all possible escape routes. Officers stormed the warehouse, arresting Ryan as he tried to flee. Emily, however, managed to slip away in the chaos, disappearing into the night. Though relieved that one perpetrator had been caught, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Emily was still out there, and she'd made it clear she wouldn't hesitate to retaliate. For now, though, he focused on the victory. The evidence he'd gathered would ensure that Ryan faced justice, and the smuggling ring would finally be dismantled. As dawn broke over the horizon, Daniel stood outside the warehouse watching as authorities loaded confiscated items into evidence vans. Passengers' stolen belongings, jewelry, electronics, cash, were finally being returned to their rightful owners. Despite the danger he'd faced, Daniel felt a sense of satisfaction. He'd done the right thing, even when it meant putting himself at risk. Still, as he walked back to his car, he couldn't help but wonder how deep the corruption truly ran. Was this really just a couple of rogue employees, or was there a larger network operating behind the scenes? One thing was certain: Daniel's work wasn't done yet. He vowed to stay vigilant, ensuring that Skyline Airlines and its passengers would never fall victim to such exploitation again. The days following the bust were a whirlwind of activity. News of the smuggling operation spread quickly through Skyline Airlines' corporate offices, sparking outrage and disbelief. Passengers whose belongings had been stolen began filing claims, demanding answers and accountability. Meanwhile, law enforcement worked tirelessly to trace the network's connections to other airports, uncovering evidence that suggested the scheme was far more widespread than anyone had initially realized. For Daniel Carter, returning to his role as CEO felt surreal. After spending nearly 2 weeks undercover as Danny, he struggled to readjust to life behind a desk. But there was no time to dwell on what he'd experienced. The fallout from the scandal required his full attention. He spent countless hours meeting with executives, legal teams, and public relations specialists, crafting a plan to restore trust in the company. One of the first steps was implementing sweeping reforms across all baggage handling operations. Daniel ordered mandatory background checks for every employee involved in luggage processing and introduced stricter oversight measures, including surveillance cameras and surprise audits. To prevent future incidents, he also established a whistleblower hotline, encouraging employees to report suspicious behavior without fear of retaliation. But beyond policy changes, Daniel knew he needed to address the human side of the issue. Many passengers had lost irreplaceable items, family heirlooms, sentimental keepsakes, and cherished mementos. In response, Skyline launched a compensation program, offering refunds, travel vouchers, and personalized apologies to those affected. Though it couldn't undo the harm caused, it was a step toward making amends. Despite these efforts, not everyone was satisfied. Some critics accused Daniel of failing to act sooner, questioning why he hadn't noticed the red flags earlier. Others argued that the scandal proved systemic corruption within the airline industry itself. While the criticism stung, Daniel accepted responsibility, acknowledging that leadership meant owning both successes and failures. In private moments, he often reflected on how close he'd come to becoming complicit in the very system he sought to dismantle. If he hadn't gone undercover, if he'd simply trusted the reports coming up through corporate channels, he might never have uncovered the truth. That realization weighed heavily on him, reminding him of the importance of staying connected to the people on the ground. Jake Miller became an unexpected ally during this period. After speaking with investigators, Jake decided to step forward as a whistleblower, sharing everything he knew about the smuggling ring. His testimony helped strengthen the case against Ryan Scott and provided valuable insights into how the operation functioned. In return, Daniel offered Jake a permanent position in the newly restructured baggage handling team, promoting him to a supervisory role focused on ensuring compliance and ethics. As for Emily Lewis, she remained at large, evading capture despite an ongoing manhunt. Law enforcement believed she had fled the country, using forged documents to disappear. Her absence left a bitter taste in Daniel's mouth, a reminder that justice wasn't always immediate or complete. Still, he refused to let her escape, overshadow the progress they'd made. Months later, as the dust began to settle, Daniel visited JFK International Airport once again. This time he wasn't wearing a disguise or carrying a clipboard. Instead, he walked confidently through the terminal, observing the improvements firsthand. Workers handled luggage with care, scanning tags and loading carts methodically. The atmosphere was quieter, more professional, devoid of the chaos and tension that had defined his undercover experience. Near the baggage claim area, Daniel spotted Jake overseeing a group of handlers. Catching sight of Daniel, Jake smiled and gave a small wave. Daniel nodded in acknowledgement, feeling a sense of pride in the young man's growth. It was proof that even in the face of adversity, positive change was possible. Later that day, Daniel found himself standing near a large window overlooking the tarmac. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the runway. Planes taxied gracefully, their engines humming softly in the distance. For a moment, he allowed himself to appreciate the beauty of it all, the intricate dance of logistics, technology, and human effort that kept the world connected. Yet his thoughts soon drifted back to the lessons he'd learned. The scandal had taught him humility, forcing him to confront the gaps between perception and reality. It had shown him the value of empathy, reminding him that leadership wasn't just about numbers and profits. It was about understanding the people who made the system work. And perhaps most importantly, it had reinforced his belief in integrity, proving that doing the right thing, no matter how difficult, was always worth it. As he turned to leave, Daniel picked up a folder from a nearby table. Inside were proposals for additional reforms, ideas for improving customer service, and plans to expand employee training programs. There was still so much to do, but he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Walking out of the terminal, Daniel glanced back one last time. The airport buzzed with energy, alive with the promise of new beginnings. Despite everything that had happened, he couldn't help but feel hopeful. Skyline Airlines had weathered the storm, emerging stronger and more resilient than before. And, though the road ahead wouldn't be easy, Daniel knew one thing for certain. He would lead with transparency, courage, and unwavering commitment to doing what was right. The aftermath of the smuggling bust continued to ripple through Skyline Airlines like a storm surge. While Daniel Carter worked tirelessly to rebuild trust within the company, the legal proceedings against Ryan Scott unfolded in courtrooms across the city. Evidence collected during the investigation painted a damning picture. Years of theft, corruption, and exploitation carried out under the guise of routine baggage handling operations. Passengers who had been victims of the scheme finally saw justice on the horizon, but for Daniel, the fight was far from over. One evening, as Daniel prepared to leave his office, Sarah Bennett approached him with a concerned look on her face. "There's something you need to see," she said, handing him a printed document. Daniel scanned it quickly, his brow furrowing as he read. It was a letter, an anonymous tip claiming that Emily Lewis wasn't just hiding abroad. She was actively working to retaliate against Skyline Airlines. According to the source, Emily had connections with other corrupt employees at different airports and was planning to expose sensitive company information unless Daniel agreed to pay her off. "This has to be a bluff," Daniel muttered, setting the paper down. "She can't possibly expect us to negotiate with someone like her." Sarah hesitated before responding. "Maybe not, but even if it's just a scare tactic, we can't ignore it. If she leaks internal data or exposes more wrongdoing, even fabricated claims, it could destroy everything we've worked so hard to fix." Daniel sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. He knew Sarah was right. The scandal had already damaged Skyline's reputation enough. Another wave of bad press could cripple the company entirely. Yet paying Emily off wasn't an option either. It would only embolden her further. "We need to stay one step ahead," Daniel said firmly. "Let's increase security around our systems and prepare a public statement addressing any potential leaks. We'll make it clear that we won't tolerate extortion." Over the next few days, Daniel collaborated closely with IT teams to fortify the company's cybersecurity measures. They encrypted sensitive files, monitored for unusual activity, and set up alerts for unauthorized access attempts. At the same time, PR specialists drafted a carefully worded announcement emphasizing Skyline's commitment to transparency and accountability. But despite these precautions, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that Emily was still out there, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her absence gnawed at him, a loose end that refused to tie itself up neatly. Every late-night email alert or unfamiliar phone call sent his heart racing, wondering if this was the moment she'd resurface. Meanwhile, Jake Miller proved to be an invaluable asset in navigating the chaos. Promoted to a supervisory role, Jake took charge of implementing new protocols in the baggage handling department. His first-hand knowledge of the smuggling ring gave him unique insight into identifying vulnerabilities and preventing future misconduct. Under his leadership, morale among the workers improved significantly, replacing fear and suspicion with teamwork and accountability. One afternoon, as Daniel toured the revamped baggage facility, Jake pulled him aside. "I've been thinking," Jake began cautiously. "What if Emily tries to recruit others? People who might still feel loyal to her?" It was a valid concern, one Daniel hadn't fully considered until now. Though most employees welcomed the changes, there were undoubtedly some who resented the increased scrutiny. If Emily reached out to them, promising money or protection, it could reignite the very problems they'd worked so hard to eliminate. "Keep an eye out for anything suspicious," Daniel instructed. "And remind everyone that reporting unethical behavior is their responsibility. We're all in this together." Jake nodded, clearly understanding the gravity of the situation. "I'll do my best." As weeks turned into months, life at Skyline slowly returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as possible. Passengers praised the improvements in luggage handling, noting fewer delays and less damage to their belongings. Employees adapted to the stricter regulations, finding comfort in the knowledge that their workplace was no longer a breeding ground for corruption. Yet, beneath the surface, tensions lingered. One evening, as Daniel reviewed quarterly reports, in his office his phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was blocked, but something compelled him to answer. "Hello?" he said cautiously. A familiar voice responded, cold and calculated. "Long time no see, Daniel." His blood ran cold. It was Emily. "You've made things difficult for me," she continued, her tone dripping with venom. "But let me assure you, I'm not done yet. You think you've cleaned house? Think again." "What do you want?" Daniel demanded, gripping the phone tightly. Emily chuckled darkly. "Nothing much, just your cooperation. Call off the dog sniffing around my trail, and maybe I'll consider leaving your precious little empire alone." "I won't negotiate with criminals," Daniel shot back, though his voice wavered slightly. "You'll get what's coming, to you eventually." Her laughter echoed through the line. "We'll see about that." Before Daniel could respond, the call disconnected. He stared at the phone, his mind racing. She was closer than he'd thought, and more dangerous than ever. Summoning Sarah immediately, Daniel relayed the conversation. Together they contacted law enforcement, urging them to intensify the search for Emily. But deep down, Daniel knew this wasn't just about catching her anymore. It was about proving that integrity and resilience could withstand even the greatest threats. In the days that followed, Daniel doubled down on his efforts to strengthen Skyline Airlines. He held town hall meetings with employees, fostering open communication and encouraging feedback. He met with passengers, listening to their concerns and assuring them that their voices mattered. And he worked tirelessly to ensure that every policy, every procedure, reflected the values he believed in honesty, transparency, and respect. Though Emily remained at large, her shadow loomed smaller with each passing day. Slowly but surely, Daniel rebuilt not just the company but also his faith in the power of doing what was right, even when it came at great personal cost. As he stood once again at the airport window, watching planes take off into the horizon, Daniel allowed himself a small smile. The road ahead would always have challenges, but for the first time in months, he felt ready to face them head-on.